How has your day been so far? Hello, we're AETA Stories, and today we're sharing a brand new original story with you.
No one ever thought to ask whether Natalie Whitmore was happy. There had never seemed to be a reason. Happiness followed her the way light followed glass. Quietly, constantly, without effort. At 22, Natalie appeared to have everything a young woman could want, and more than most ever received. She was beautiful in an understated way, composed rather than dazzling, with a calm confidence that came from never having known instability. She had grown up protected, educated, and assured that the world would meet her halfway if she reached out her hand. Natalie had just graduated at the top of her class, earning honors in international economics. Her achievements were celebrated not as surprises, but as confirmations. From childhood, she had been raised to expect excellence from herself and reliability from others. Her parents had made certain of that. Elaine and Thomas Whitmore owned a chain of luxury hotels across the Midwest and along the East Coast, properties known for discretion, refinement, and impeccable service. Their name carried weight in business circles and respect in social ones. Natalie was their only child, the heir to a carefully built empire, and the center of a life arranged with deliberate care. Her upbringing reflected that care in every detail. The schools she attended, the languages she learned, the people she met, nothing had been left to chance. Natalie never felt controlled, only guided. Her parents' love was steady and unquestioned, expressed through attention, opportunity, and an unspoken promise that she would never be left alone to face the world unprepared. In return, she trusted them completely. They had always known what was best. Why would that change now? The engagement seemed to prove them right. Gregory Hale entered Natalie's life with the confidence of a man who belonged wherever he stood. Nearly a decade older, polished, articulate, and successful, he owned and managed several high-end hospitality ventures of his own. He understood the language of boardrooms and balance sheets as fluently as Natalie understood academic theory. To her parents, he was not just charming, but appropriate. To Natalie, he felt impressive, attentive, and reassuringly certain. Gregory courted her with precision. He anticipated her preferences, remembered small details, and spoke about the future as if it were already planned and secure. His compliments were measured, his humor quick and effortless. He never raised his voice, never appeared unsure of himself. When he looked at Natalie, it felt like admiration. When he spoke about marriage, it sounded like partnership. Friends described them as perfectly matched, and Natalie smiled at the phrase, accepting it as truth. In public, they looked flawless together. He was confident and composed. She was poised and radiant. Their engagement was announced quietly, then celebrated lavishly. Two families of equal standing had come together, the Whitmores and the Hales, and the union was met with universal approval. People spoke of synergy, of shared values, of how natural it all seemed. Natalie absorbed their words without suspicion. She believed in the idea of family unity, in love that grew from respect, in marriages that were strengthened by shared purpose. She felt no fear as the wedding approached, only anticipation. Trust settled easily in her chest, warm and familiar. She imagined a future shaped by mutual support, by loyalty, by the blending of two strong families into something even more stable. If there were moments when the marriage was described less as a choice and more as a perfect match, Natalie did not question the difference. At 22, she had never learned to. To her, everything still looked exactly the way it was supposed to. The dinner was held 3 nights before the wedding, at the Whitmore estate on the North Shore of Chicago. The house stood back from the road, framed by old trees and soft exterior lighting that gave the property a quiet, dignified glow. Inside, everything had been arranged with the same care that defined the Whitmore's life. Polished wood, crisp linens, restrained elegance. Nothing ostentatious, nothing out of place. Natalie moved through the evening with an ease that surprised even her. She had expected nerves, perhaps a flicker of anxiety so close to the ceremony. But instead, she felt light, almost buoyant. The dining room hummed with low conversation and gentle laughter. Glasses clinked. Plates were served and cleared with practiced efficiency. It felt less like a formal gathering and more like a family that already knew one another well. Gregory's parents, Margaret and Richard Hale, were seated across from Natalie. From the moment they arrived, they had surrounded her with attention. Margaret reached for her hand more than once, squeezing it warmly as if to reassure herself that Natalie was truly there. Richard, more reserved but no less approving, nodded along as Natalie spoke, occasionally adding a comment that made it clear he was listening closely. "You're remarkable," Margaret said at one point, her voice soft but certain. "Gregory is very lucky." Natalie flushed slightly, smiling in a way that felt both shy and pleased. Gregory glanced at her, his expression calm and affectionate, and rested his hand lightly over hers. The gesture was small, but it anchored her. She felt seen, valued. The conversation flowed easily. There was talk of travel, of future plans, of expanding the family businesses. Gregory spoke confidently about upcoming projects, about collaboration and shared vision. Natalie listened with interest, imagining herself beside him in those conversations, learning, contributing. Her parents watched the exchange with visible satisfaction. Elaine's eyes lingered on Natalie with quiet pride, while Thomas leaned back in his chair, relaxed, as if reassured that everything was unfolding exactly as it should. Compliments came steadily, layered one over another. Natalie was praised for her intelligence, her composure, her warmth. Margaret spoke of how naturally Natalie fit into their family, how quickly she had come to feel like a daughter rather than a future in-law. Laughter rose around the table, easy and unforced. Even the pauses felt comfortable, filled with shared understanding rather than awkwardness. As the evening went on, Natalie began to feel the weight of it all, not discomfort, but a gentle exhaustion. The attention, the emotions, the sense of standing at the edge of something immense pressed in on her at once. She excused herself politely, pressing a hand to her temple. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I think I just need to lie down for a moment. The day's caught up with me." Margaret immediately waved her off with concern. "Of course, dear. It's all the excitement. You should rest." Natalie stepped into a small sitting room adjacent to the dining area, a quiet space with a chaise positioned beneath a shaded lamp. She slipped out of her heels, curled onto the cushion, and pulled a soft throw over herself. The muffled sounds of conversation continued beyond the door, familiar and comforting. She closed her eyes, breathing slowly, letting the warmth of the room settle around her. In that stillness, a sense of gratitude filled her chest. Gratitude for Gregory, for his steadiness and certainty. Gratitude for both families, brought together not by accident, but by shared values and mutual respect. Everything felt aligned, secure, promising. As voices drifted in from the dining room, low, indistinct, calm, Natalie smiled faintly to herself. She felt wrapped not just in the blanket, but in certainty, surrounded by people who cared, on the verge of a future that, in that moment, seemed unbreakable. At first, Natalie did not intend to pretend. The warmth of the room and the steady rhythm of voices beyond the door had lulled her into stillness, her thoughts drifting in loose, pleasant circles. When footsteps approached the sitting room, she barely registered them. A shadow crossed the doorway. Someone paused. "She's asleep," Elaine Whitmore's voice said softly, with the casual certainty of a mother who believed she knew her daughter's breathing better than anyone else's. Natalie felt the moment pass over her like a held breath. Instinct, not calculation, kept her eyes closed. She did not move. The door remained slightly ajar. The adults returned to the dining room. and with them came a silence that felt different, intentional, deliberate. Then the tone changed. Gone was the warmth, the affectionate cadence that had filled the evening. When Margaret Hale spoke again, her voice was crisp, controlled, stripped of softness. It was the voice of a woman conducting business. So she said, "The final draft of the agreement will be ready tomorrow. Once the marriage is registered, Gregory takes his seat on the board. From there, the transfer can proceed without raising suspicion." Richard Hale cleared his throat. "And the liabilities?" "They're absorbed through the development fund," Margaret replied without hesitation. Quietly, as planned. Natalie's mind stalled, as if the words had struck something solid inside her. Liabilities, transfer, board. She strained to hear, her pulse beginning to climb. Thomas Whitmore spoke next, his voice lower than usual, measured. "The numbers are tight. This resolves the immediate exposure, but only if everything moves quickly." "It will," Margaret said. "Natalie won't question it. She trusts the process. She trusts you." A faint sound escaped Natalie's throat before she could stop it. She pressed her lips together, willing her body into stillness. Her heart hammered so loudly she was certain they would hear it. "What matters," Richard added, "is control. Once the shares are consolidated, the risk disappears." "And Gregory's position?" Elaine asked. "He'll remain visible," Margaret answered. "Attentive, devoted, long enough for the paperwork to settle." The room seemed to tilt. Natalie's thoughts scattered, grasping at fragments of sentences, trying to assemble them into something that made sense. Debts, control, consolidation, her marriage, placed neatly among financial instruments, discussed with the same detachment as a line item on a balance sheet. "And Natalie?" Richard asked. There was a brief pause, long enough to feel deliberate. "She won't suspect a thing," Margaret said. "She believes in family, in unity. That's our advantage." Elaine's voice followed, sharper than Natalie had ever heard it. "As agreed, you will receive what you're owed. But Gregory must continue playing his role. No mistakes, no emotional lapses." Natalie's breath caught. Her own mother's voice sounded unfamiliar, colder, edged with authority. The woman who had tucked her in as a child, who had guided her through every milestone, now spoke of her as if she were not present, not listening, not human. "Of course," Margaret replied smoothly. "This arrangement benefits everyone." Everyone. The word echoed in Natalie's head, hollow and false. A chill crept along her spine as understanding began to take shape, not all at once, but in fragments that refused to be ignored. Gregory's family was in trouble, serious trouble, debts significant enough to threaten their business. And her marriage was not a union of lives, but a solution, a mechanism, a bridge over financial collapse. And her parents knew. They had known from the beginning. Natalie felt something inside her split open, a silent fracture that widened with every word spoken in the next room. She was not the future daughter-in-law they praised. She was leverage, access, a transfer of power wrapped in white silk and ceremony. Her thoughts rebelled. This couldn't be what it sounded like. There had to be context she was missing, nuance she couldn't hear. She clung to the possibility with desperate resolve. Surely they were discussing something else. Surely her parents would never. "But once we secure her share," Richard continued, "the exposure is gone." Natalie's fingers curled into the fabric beneath her. Her share. The words landed with finality, stripping away the last layer of denial. There was no misunderstanding, no alternate explanation. She lay frozen, eyes closed, heart racing. Every instinct screaming at her to flee, to confront, to breathe. But her body refused to move. Fear held her in place, thick and suffocating. If she shifted now, if she revealed herself, the fragile illusion of safety would shatter completely. So she stayed still, And in the darkness behind her closed eyes, Natalie Whitmore understood, with terrible clarity, that she was not a bride preparing for marriage. She was an asset about to be transferred. Natalie remained motionless long after the conversation ended. The adults' voices softened again as they returned to polite tones, as if a switch had been flipped. Chairs shifted, glasses clinked, someone laughed. The sound drifted toward her, distant and unreal, like music heard underwater. Footsteps approached the sitting room once more. Natalie felt them before she heard them, a change in the air, a tightening in her chest. She kept her eyes closed, her breathing slow and even, clinging to the thin pretense of sleep as if it were armor. "Let me check on her," Gregory said quietly. The door opened wider. Natalie sensed him standing near the chaise, close enough that she could smell his cologne. Familiar and suddenly unbearable, he leaned over her, studying her face. She did not move. After a few seconds, he straightened and stepped back. "She's out," he said. "Completely." Margaret Hale's voice followed, lowered but sharp. "Be careful what you say." Gregory exhaled, the sound heavy with irritation. "I'm careful all the time. I'm exhausted." They moved a few steps away, still within earshot. Natalie felt her pulse thudding against her ribs. Every sense sharpened. "I can't keep doing this," Gregory continued, his restraint slipping. "The way she looks at me, the way she talks about the future. He broke off, then added more quietly, "It's getting harder." "This is almost over," Margaret replied firmly. "You knew that when we started." "I know," he said, but there was no comfort in his voice. "But she keeps calling. Natalie. She wants to spend time together before the wedding. She says she feels closer to me than ever." Natalie's throat tightened. She swallowed, willing herself not to make a sound. Margaret did not soften. "You'll say the right things. Reassure her. These are the last days she expects anything from you. After the paperwork is signed, after the shares are secured, you'll be free to return to your real life." There it was, clear, unmistakable. "And Hannah?" Gregory asked. "She's not taking this well. She says she can't go through the wedding. She says it's killing her." "Then calm her down," Margaret snapped. "Remind her what's at stake. Remind her that this is for your family." "For our family," Gregory corrected automatically. Natalie's chest constricted. Her breath hitched before she could stop it. She pressed her lips together, her body trembling despite her effort to remain still. "And the child?" Gregory asked after a moment. Margaret's answer was immediate. "Your son will be fine. This marriage doesn't change that. Once everything is settled, you'll be with them. All of this depends on her patience." Natalie felt the words like a physical blow. Another woman, a child, not a past mistake or a brief affair, but a life. A family spoken of with certainty and possession. The family Gregory belonged to, the one he was returning to. The humiliation burned hot and sharp, followed closely by grief, so heavy it stole the air from her lungs. She felt stripped bare, exposed in ways she had never imagined. Every smile Gregory had given her, every promise, every careful gesture now replayed in her mind with cruel clarity. It had all been performance, precision, strategy. Rage surged, sudden and violent, demanding release. Her hands curled into fists beneath the throw, nails digging into her palms. She wanted to scream, to rise up and confront them, to shatter the calm they took for granted. But she did not move. She understood, with a clarity that cut deeper than anger, that reacting now would only make her vulnerable. They believed her asleep. They believed her unaware. That illusion, thin as it was the only protection she had left. So Natalie forced herself to stir. She shifted, letting out a soft sound, the kind a half-awake person might make. She stretched slightly, as if emerging from a deep sleep, and turned her head toward the light. Gregory and his mother fell silent instantly. Natalie opened her eyes and blinked, feigning confusion. "I must have dozed off," she said, her voice unsteady but convincing. "I didn't mean to disappear like that." Gregory smiled, the familiar, practiced expression sliding effortlessly back into place. "You looked exhausted," he said gently. "Come back when you're ready." Natalie nodded and sat up slowly, her movements careful, controlled. Inside, something had broken beyond repair. She stepped back into the dining room, wearing the same face she had left with, and no one suspected that everything had already changed. Natalie did not stay long after returning to the dining room. She took her seat for only a few minutes, just long enough to make her departure seem natural. The room felt smaller now, the air heavier, as if the walls themselves were pressing in. Every voice sounded distant. Every smile looked rehearsed. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, pressing her fingers to her temple. "I have a terrible headache. I think I should go home and lie down." Her words landed softly, almost apologetically, and she waited, without admitting it to herself, for someone to protest, for concern, for an offer to drive her, to insist she stay, to ask whether she was all right. None came. Margaret Hale nodded with a look of polite sympathy. "Of course, dear. You've had a long day." Elaine Whitmore rose from her chair, walked around the table, and kissed Natalie lightly on the cheek. "Get some rest," she said. "We'll talk tomorrow." Gregory watched her with the same calm attentiveness he always wore in public. "Text me when you get home," he said, his tone warm, measured. He did not reach for his coat. He did not suggest accompanying her. Natalie forced a smile, murmured her goodbyes, and walked toward the front door. No one followed. Behind her, conversation resumed almost immediately, as if her presence had never been essential to begin with. The night air was cold when she stepped outside, sharp enough to sting. She drew in a breath that felt too shallow, too thin, and unlocked her car. As she pulled away from the estate, the house receded into darkness, its windows glowing softly, unchanged, undisturbed. She drove without direction, turning where the road bent, letting instinct carry her forward. Streetlights blurred past. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles whitening as her thoughts unraveled. The dinner replayed in fragments, words stripped of warmth, voices she no longer recognized, her parents' calm participation, Gregory's real family spoken of without hesitation. The realization struck again and again, each time landing harder than before. How long had they known? How long had she been blind? She thought of every moment she had trusted without question, every decision she had believed was mutual, every assurance she had accepted as love. Shame crept in, quiet and corrosive. She had been so certain, so proud of her judgment, of her life. Her chest tightened, breath catching as anger and grief collided. She felt foolish, exposed, reduced to a role she had never agreed to play. The future she had imagined dissolved into something unrecognizable, leaving behind a hollow ache where certainty had lived. The road ahead darkened as the city lights thinned, giving way to long, unlit stretches of highway. Natalie barely noticed. Tears blurred her vision, but she did not slow down. She did not seem capable of doing so. The speed felt like the only thing holding her together, the only thing preventing her from stopping completely and letting everything collapse at once. Her thoughts spiraled faster, tighter. Her parents, Gregory, the lies woven so neatly around her life. The realization that concern, once withdrawn, left nothing behind. A sharp curve appeared too late. Natalie reacted on instinct, hands jerking the wheel as tires screamed against the pavement. For a brief, weightless second, the world tilted. Headlights cut through darkness, illuminating nothing but empty road and the sudden drop beyond it. Then control vanished. The impact came violently, metal screaming as the car left the roadway. The force threw her forward, air exploding from her lungs as the world fractured into sound and motion. Glass shattered. Something struck hard, then harder still, and then nothing. No thoughts, no pain, no voices, only darkness, stretching wide and absolute, swallowing the night whole. Natalie regained consciousness slowly, as if surfacing from deep water. At first, there was only sensation, pressure against her chest, a dull ringing in her ears, the acrid smell of deployed airbags. Pain followed in fragments, a throbbing at her temple, an ache spreading through her shoulders and ribs, the sting of scraped skin. She tried to move and stopped, breath hitching as dizziness washed over her. A voice reached her through the fog. Come, male, close. Hey, don't try to sit up. You're okay. Natalie opened her eyes. The world wavered, then steadied enough for her to make out a figure leaning into the driver's side door. The night sky loomed beyond him, vast and dark. Red hazard lights blinked somewhere nearby, their rhythm oddly soothing. You were in an accident, the man said gently. Airbags did their job. You took a hit, but you're conscious. That's a good sign. She swallowed, her throat dry. My car can wait, he said. Focus on breathing. He introduced himself as Ryan Carter, a tow truck driver heading home when he'd seen her car leave the road. He had called it in, checked for fire, and waited until he was sure she could answer him. He spoke without urgency, without judgment, as if this were simply something that had happened, not a catastrophe demanding explanation. Natalie nodded weakly. She felt hollowed out, emptied of panic. Shock, she realized dimly. The kind that wrapped you in cotton and dulled the edges of everything. An ambulance arrived, then police. Questions were asked. Names requested. Dates. Natalie heard herself answer automatically until the moment someone asked, Ma'am, can you confirm your name? The words caught in her throat. She looked at Ryan, then back at the officer, and something settled into place inside her with unexpected clarity. If she said her name now, everything would begin again. The search, the wedding, the explanations she was not ready to give. Alexandra, she said instead, the lie slipping out smoothly. Alexandra Miller. The officer noted it down. No one challenged her. The paperwork moved on. At the hospital, the assessment was brief and efficient. Bruising, a mild concussion, shock, no internal bleeding. She was lucky, airbags, seatbelt, the angle of impact, a series of small mercies that had aligned by chance. Natalie listened as if the information belonged to someone else. Ryan waited. When she was discharged with instructions and a warning not to drive, he offered without hesitation, I can take you somewhere safe, just for the night. She hesitated only a moment before agreeing. She had nowhere she could go that felt like home. Not anymore. Ryan's house sat near the edge of town, where the road narrowed and the air smelled faintly of hay and damp earth. As they pulled in, Natalie noticed a sign on the neighboring property. Simple lettering, hand-painted, illuminated by a single light. Animal rescue. Ryan followed her gaze. My sister started it, he said. Before, anyway. We help where we can. Inside, the house was modest and clean. No excess. No pretense. He made tea, handed her a blanket, and showed her to a couch without asking questions she clearly wasn't ready to answer. The quiet felt intentional, protective. In the morning, she woke to unfamiliar sounds, soft barking in the distance, the clatter of bowls, the low hum of voices outside. She followed them to the window and saw the rescue up close. Fenced runs, volunteers moving with purpose, animals being fed and brushed and walked. The routine was steady, unremarkable and grounding. Later, she met Oliver. He stood near the fence, small and solemn, watching the dogs with an intensity that bordered on reverence. He did not speak when Ryan introduced him. He did not look away either. Natalie knelt beside him, unsure of what to say, then simply stayed quiet. After a moment, Oliver handed her a brush. They worked side by side, wordless. Ryan explained later, gently, that Oliver hadn't spoken since losing his mother. Trauma had taken his voice and left him guarded, observant. Natalie listened, feeling something ease in her chest. There was no expectation here, no performance, just presence. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the shelter settled into calm, Natalie realized she felt safe. Not because everything was fixed, but because, for the first time since the dinner, no one wanted anything from her. She was alive, anonymous, and for now that was enough. The news found Natalie before anyone found her. It played quietly in the background of Ryan's kitchen, a television left on more out of habit than attention. The headlines scrolled across the screen in restrained tones that could not disguise their urgency. Heiress missing days before wedding. A photograph followed. Natalie at a charity gala, poised and composed, the image chosen for its elegance rather than its accuracy. The anchor spoke of concern, of unanswered questions, of a family devastated by worry. Natalie watched without expression. The camera cut to footage outside the Whitmore estate. Reporters clustered near the gates. Gregory stood beside Elaine and Thomas, his arm placed carefully around Elaine's shoulders, his face drawn into a mask of concern that Natalie now recognized for what it was. Margaret Hale dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Richard Hale spoke of hope, of faith, of prayers. The performance was flawless. Natalie turned off the television. She did not feel anger at first, only a distant, almost clinical clarity. They would look for her. They would ask questions. They would move quickly, efficiently, and with resources she could not match if she remained merely missing. Time, she understood now, was the one thing she did not have. Unless she took it, the idea formed slowly, not as impulse, but as conclusion. If she stayed alive on paper, she would be found, tracked, pulled back into a story already written for her. If she wanted space, real space, to understand what had been done and how to answer it, she would need to disappear completely. That meant dying, not in truth, but in record. Ryan listened as she explained, his brow furrowing deeper with every sentence. "That's dangerous," he said quietly. "And once you do it, there's no undoing it." "I know," Natalie replied. Her voice did not shake. "That's the point." They drove out just before dusk, the sky heavy with clouds that promised rain. Natalie's car had been recovered and towed to a temporary holding yard near the river, where the road curved sharply before dropping away. It was the same stretch where she had lost control, isolated, poorly lit, and known for strong currents below. Ryan moved with careful efficiency, washing down surfaces inside the vehicle, removing any trace that did not belong. Natalie did the opposite. She touched everything: the steering wheel, the door handle, the trunk latch. She pressed her palms against metal, glass, fabric, leaving herself behind with deliberate intent. When it was time, she took the driver's seat one last time. They parked just short of the curve. The engine was left running. The headlights cut through the gathering dark, illuminating the guardrail ahead. Ryan handed her gloves, put his own on, and together they pushed. The car rolled forward, slow at first, then with gathering certainty, breaking through the barrier with a sharp, tearing sound. Metal screamed. The vehicle tipped, slid, then vanished from view, crashing down through brush and stone until it struck and lodged against the bank below. A door tore free on impact, skidding across the rocks. The trunk burst open, spilling clothing and personal items that scattered toward the water. Natalie stood at the edge, watching. "Good," she said quietly. "It looks right." Ryan said nothing. He did not need to. By morning, the scene would tell its own story. A high-speed loss of control, a fall, an unfastened seatbelt, a river that did not give back what it took. The logic aligned cleanly with procedure. Tragic, final, back at the house. Natalie used the cheapest phone she could find, a burner purchased with cash at a roadside store. She memorized the number, then dialed. Leonard Brooks answered on the fourth ring. He did not recognize the number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pause. "Leonard," Natalie said softly. There was a brief silence. Then, "Where are you?" "Safe," she replied. "For now." His voice shifted immediately, humor draining away, replaced by sharp focus. "You're not supposed to be alive." "I know." "Then you're in more danger than anyone realizes." Natalie told him everything. The dinner, the deal, the other woman, the child, the stage crash. Leonard listened without interruption, his questions few and precise. When she finished, he exhaled slowly. "You did the only thing you could," he said at last. "If they think you're dead, they'll move differently. Sloppier." "I need time," Natalie said. "And protection." "You'll have both," Leonard replied. "But you cannot surface. Not yet. Not anywhere." "I understand." "I'll work quietly," he continued. "No calls. No messages unless necessary." "And Natalie," he paused, "this ends cleanly. Or it doesn't end at all." When the call ended, Natalie removed the battery and placed the phone in a drawer. On paper, Natalie Whitmore was gone. In truth, she had only just begun to act. Leonard Brooks moved quickly once he had what he needed. He did not use Natalie's name, did not leave a trail, and did not ask questions he could answer himself. Within 48 hours, he had a location, a phone number, and a quiet assessment that confirmed what Natalie already suspected. Hannah Miller existed, not as a rumor or a mistake, but as a life. Leonard passed the information along through a single, careful message. An address, a time. Natalie understood what it meant. This meeting could not be undone once it happened. She went alone. The apartment was modest and well kept, the kind of place that reflected practicality rather than aspiration. When the door opened, the woman standing there was close to Gregory's age, composed, with a tired gentleness in her eyes. She looked at Natalie without surprise, as if she had been expecting her. "You're Natalie," Hannah said quietly. Natalie nodded. "We need to talk." Hannah stepped aside without argument and gestured for her to come in. The door closed behind them with a soft click that sounded final. For a moment, neither woman spoke. The air between them was heavy, not with hostility, but with the weight of too much unspoken truth. They sat at the kitchen table. Hannah poured tea, her movement steady, almost automatic. "We met 5 years ago," Hannah began. "Long before the engagement. Long before anyone talked about weddings." She spoke calmly without bitterness, as if recounting a story she had told herself many times in order to survive it. Gregory had been charming, attentive, present. What started as conversation turned into shared routines, shared space. Within months, he had moved in. They built a life, quietly, without announcements or promises he claimed were unnecessary. Their son had come later, planned, wanted. Gregory had been attentive then, too, buying the apartment, ensuring their comfort, introducing them to his parents as his family. Hannah smiled faintly at the memory, then looked away. "And then everything changed," she said. Financial strain crept in first. Gregory grew distracted, tense, often absent even when he was physically present. He stopped talking about the future. Then one evening, he told her the truth, or enough of it to serve his purpose. "He said it was temporary," Hannah continued. "A marriage arranged to fix things. A transaction. He said once the documents were signed, he'd come back to us. That this was for the family." Natalie listened without interruption, her hands folded in her lap, her face composed. Inside, something hardened into place. Hannah admitted she had begged him not to go through with it. She had suggested other solutions, compromises, even public separation if it meant honesty. Gregory refused. When she persisted, his tone changed. He began to remind her of what he controlled: the apartment, the money, access to their child. He told me if I interfered, he'd take our son, Hannah said, her voice lowering. Legally, financially. He said I wouldn't be able to stop him. Natalie's jaw tightened. That's when I started recording, Hannah said, reaching into a drawer. She placed a small device on the table, then slid a folder beside it. Everything. Calls. Conversations. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I needed protection. She pushed the items toward Natalie. They're yours now. Natalie did not touch them immediately. Why give them to me? Hannah met her gaze. Because you can stop him. And because I can't do this alone. There was no accusation in her voice. No demand. Only exhaustion and resolve. I don't want him ruined, Hannah added. I want my son safe. I want the truth to exist somewhere outside of his control. Natalie reached for the folder at last, her fingers steady. She did not feel triumph. She did not feel vindication. What she felt was responsibility. This isn't about revenge, Natalie said quietly. It's about ending what he started. Completely. Hannah nodded once, relief flickering briefly across her face. That's all I'm asking. When Natalie stood to leave, Hannah walked her to the door. I won't tell anyone we met, Hannah said. He won't hear this from me. Natalie paused, then turned back. I'll make sure your child is protected. Hannah's shoulders sagged slightly, as if a weight had finally been set down. Outside, Natalie breathed in the cool air and felt the shape of the truth settle fully into place. The story was no longer fragmented, the lies no longer isolated. For the first time since the dinner, Natalie did not feel alone. Justice, she understood now, was not about destruction. It was about accountability, and she was ready to carry it through. Natalie did not announce her return. She arrived quietly, deliberately, on a gray afternoon that felt heavy with inevitability. The Whitmore house looked exactly as it always had. Immaculate, controlled, secure. From the outside, nothing suggested that its foundations were about to crack. Inside, everyone was already gathered. Her parents sat stiffly in the living room, tension visible even before words were exchanged. Gregory was there with his mother and father, all three of them carrying the brittle composure of people who sensed danger but still believed they could manage it. When the front door opened, every head turned. Natalie stepped in first, alive, uninjured, calm. Behind her came Leonard Brooks, carrying a leather briefcase. Then Hannah Miller, pale but steady, holding her child's hand. 2 additional men followed, professionals, silent, though not as threats, but as witnesses. For several seconds, no one spoke. Gregory's face drained of color. His mother's hand flew instinctively to the arm of her chair, fingers tightening. Natalie's adoptive father rose halfway from his seat, then sank back down again, as if standing required more strength than he had left. You're alive, Gregory said at last, his voice hoarse. Natalie met his gaze evenly. Yes. There was no accusation in the word, just fact. Leonard stepped forward and set the briefcase on the table. We're here to clarify several matters, he said calmly, legally and otherwise. Gregory's mother tried to smile. This is unnecessary drama, she said. If there's been a misunderstanding, there hasn't, Leonard replied, opening the case. And we're well past misunderstandings. He laid out documents first. Financial records, transfer schedules, audit results. The room grew quieter with each page turned. Hidden debts, unauthorized fund movements, planned consolidation through marriage, Leonard continued, all contingent on Natalie's legal status as spouse. Gregory tried to interrupt, but Hannah spoke before he could. You told me it was temporary, she said, her voice trembling only slightly. You told me you'd come back once the papers were signed. She placed the recorder on the table and pressed play. Gregory's voice filled the room, confident, dismissive, calculating. talking about marriage as leverage, about divorce as timing, about control. His mother went rigid. His father stared at the floor. Natalie's adoptive mother covered her mouth, tears spilling silently. Her father looked as if he were aging in real time. "You used her," Natalie said, quietly looking at Gregory. "You planned to use me, and you threatened her child." Gregory stood abruptly. "You don't understand." "Sit down," Leonard said sharply. Gregory froze. Then, slowly he did. Natalie turned to her parents. "I heard the dinner conversation," she said. "All of it. I want to hear it from you." Her adoptive father swallowed hard. "We were trying to fix things," he said. "Protect what we built." "By selling me?" Natalie asked. Her mother sobbed openly now. "We were trapped," she whispered. Gregory's mother straightened. "That's enough," she said coolly. "If we're telling stories, let's tell them properly." Every eye turned to her. "You were never theirs," she said, looking at Natalie. "Not really." Silence fell like a physical force. Natalie felt the words land, sharp and disorienting, but she did not flinch. "Explain." Her adoptive mother gasped. Her father closed his eyes. "They saved you," Gregory's mother continued, her tone almost satisfied. "After the fire." Leonard glanced at Natalie, then nodded slightly. Her adoptive mother spoke at last, her voice broken. "Your biological parents died when you were a baby. Arson. Business rivals. The hotel chain was growing too fast." Natalie's breath caught. "We worked for them," her adoptive father said. "That night, the fire spread so quickly. We got you out. They didn't make it." They explained then how the records had been changed, how they raised her as their own, how they protected the company until it could survive, how fear had kept them silent. "She knew," Natalie said slowly, looking back at Gregory's mother. "Yes," the woman replied. "And when our finances collapsed, I reminded them what would happen if the truth came out." Blackmail, clear and cold. Natalie absorbed it all without raising her voice. "You threatened them with prison," Natalie said, "and me with marriage." Leonard closed the briefcase. "Which brings us to consequences." He outlined them efficiently. Criminal charges, fraud, coercion, evidence already submitted, protection orders for Hannah and her child. Gregory's father finally spoke. "This is over," he said, defeated. "Yes," Natalie agreed. "It is." She turned to her adoptive parents. "You should have trusted me." Her mother nodded, tears streaming. "We were afraid." "I know," Natalie said, and meant it. As the others were escorted out, the room emptied slowly, leaving behind only the truth and its weight. Natalie stood alone for a moment, breathing deeply. The perfect life was gone. What remained was something harder and real. Justice did not come quickly, and it did not come gently. It arrived through documents, courtrooms, sealed statements, and months of quiet legal work that unfolded far from cameras and sympathy headlines. The evidence Leonard Brooks had assembled was irrefutable. Financial fraud, coercion, abuse of corporate authority, witness testimony, recorded threats. Gregory's parents were convicted on multiple counts. Assets were frozen, then seized. Businesses once praised in glossy magazines were dismantled piece by piece, their reputations collapsing under the weight of their own deception. The social circles that had once applauded them grew suddenly silent. Gregory himself avoided prison, but not consequence. His cooperation reduced his sentence to fines and restrictions, yet the damage to his name was permanent. In boardrooms and private meetings, his reputation became a warning rather than a credential. Hannah and her child were protected under court orders. Gregory was barred from contact. Financial support was mandated, not as generosity but as obligation. For the first time, Hannah slept without fear of a knock at the door. Natalie did not attend every hearing. She did not need to. Justice, she had learned, did not require her constant presence. It required her resolve. When the legal dust settled, control of the hotel group returned to where it belonged. Natalie assumed leadership, not as an heiress stepping into luxury, but as a woman who had seen exactly what power could destroy when handled without conscience. She ordered independent audits, replaced entire management tiers, ended relationships built on silence and fear. Employees noticed the change quickly. Decisions were slower, more transparent, grounded in accountability rather than image. At home, healing was quieter. Natalie did not erase the truth about her adoption. She did not pretend it had not shaken her sense of self, but she chose forgiveness, not as denial, not as absolution, but as a decision to move forward without hatred. Her adoptive parents stepped away from leadership permanently. They remained in her life, humbled, aging, grateful. Natalie redefined their place, not as flawless guardians, but as flawed people who had loved her imperfectly and feared losing her too much. Trust was rebuilt slowly. On new terms, Natalie chose a different future. She did not return to the life she had escaped. She did not reclaim the illusion of perfection. Instead, she built something smaller, steadier, and entirely her own. Her marriage to Ryan Carter happened without spectacle. No press, no speeches, no curated images. Just a small gathering, honest vows, and the quiet certainty of equality. There were no promises of rescue or sacrifice, only partnership. Ryan did not try to shield Natalie from her past. He did not attempt to fix what was broken. He stood beside her and let her be whole in her own way. Oliver's adoption followed soon after. The process was careful, deliberate, guided by professionals who understood trauma better than sentiment. Oliver spoke his first words months later. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but softly, as if testing whether the world would still listen. Natalie heard him every time. She did not rush him. She did not demand progress. She learned that healing was not linear and that patience was a form of love. Years later, when asked about the scandal that once consumed headlines, Natalie answered simply, "Truth doesn't destroy families," she said. "Silence does." She no longer chased approval. Wealth still existed in her life, but it no longer defined her worth. Power became responsibility, not entitlement. And love, real love, was no longer something she accepted blindly. It was chosen, earned, protected. Natalie understood now that betrayal did not mean weakness. That silence could be strategy, not submission. That walking away was sometimes the strongest form of resistance. Justice, she learned, rarely arrived with applause. It arrived when lies could no longer stand, when the story ended not with triumph but with clarity. For those listening to this story, take a moment to reflect. What would you have done in Natalie's place if the life you trusted most had been built on lies? Can forgiveness exist without forgetting? And where is the line between loyalty and self-betrayal? Share your thoughts in the comments. This story may be over, but the conversation does not have to end here.